Holy guys, today honestly was a difficult day. It was super cold outside. I forced myself to go out to the gym, hit legs today as hard as I ever hit it before. And to be honest with you guys, all I wanted to do was come home and sleep. But I pushed through, did everything I had to do on my to-do list, and now I'm here making this video for you guys. I want to talk a little bit about the backstory for this particular video. One of my homies hit me up and he was basically like, yo, Jay, my wife got this strobe and she's having some trouble with it. Every time she takes a picture, it's not coming out right. It's either too dark or it's too bright and we're trying to figure out what's going on. So he's like, would you come over and, take a look and maybe see what's going on and help her out a bit? And because this is my guy, I said, all right, cool. So when I looked at her camera and I analyzed the settings, I was like, okay, I know exactly what's happening here. The aperture was all over the place. The shutter speed was too high. The ISO was also, doing its own thing. And I just asked her, I'm like, hey, are you familiar with the exposure triangle and how that works? And she looked at me and she was like, honestly, I heard about it before, but I don't really know what it does. So basically we did a quick tutorial in our living room just to explain how the exposure triangle works and what it does. And that's basically what prompted me to say, you know what, let me go ahead and take this video and put it out now so more people can benefit from this information. So let's get into this video. We probably all heard of the term shooting manually. It's where we take the camera settings for aperture, ISO, and shutter speed and set them in a particular way to get the exposure. But what good is knowing those terms but not knowing how they actually affect what we're shooting? Well, that's what we're going to learn today with the exposure triangle. Any camera you use has three basic manual settings. The aperture, which opens and closes down on the lens blades, resulting in the frame either getting brighter or darker. ISO, which digitally increases the camera's sensor sensitivity, allowing more light or less to hit the frame. And then there's your shutter speed, which is essentially how quickly the shutter comes down in front of the sensor to create a frame. This, depending on how the setting is set, will also increase or decrease the exposure in the frame. But here's where things become interesting. Each control has an effect on what will happen within the frame you're trying to create. And if you don't set it properly, it can negatively impact the viewing experience. Let's start with your aperture. Most lenses give you a range from f2.8 to f16 range. The lower the number is, it means the more light is able to enter the camera and hit the sensor. And the higher it is, the less light. This also affects your depth of field. You ever look at a video and be like, wow, I like how that person is in focus and the background is so out of focus. It really draws your attention to the subject in the frame. Well, this is what aperture controls. The lower the f-stop number, the shallower the depth of field is, and the brighter the image will be. On the reverse side of it, the higher the f-stop number is, the deeper the depth of field will be and the darker the image will be. The aperture on a lens can also really dictate the price. I think the lowest I've personally ever seen on a lens is something like f0.8. I can imagine how well the lens would be for allowing light into the camera, but good luck getting even focus on a person's face using that. Okay, let's talk about the ISO now. The ISO is a quick and dirty way of either increasing or decreasing the amount of light in your image. When I first started shooting, I used ISO as a primary way to get the exposure of my content. And I started realizing that something was really off about what I was doing. Like sometimes the image looked really decent, and sometimes it was like really fuzzy and noisy looking. Basically, the higher the ISO is, the more sensitive your sensor is to the light. But this also means that you're creating noise within your image. Noise is that digital, grainy looking stuff that your image has, especially in the shadows of your image. If you're going for that look, cool, but it really decreases the quality of your footage. Most cameras have a native ISO that the manufacturer suggests you use to get the cleanest and most dynamic range out of your camera. On my Red Komodo, they say that number is 800 ISO. This means if I'm exposing for something on my camera and it's set to 800, I would have the best opportunity to get clean shadows and highlights. From there, I can make a decision either to raise it or lower it depending on the situation. I would suggest looking into your camera's manufacturer and see what they say. Last but not least is your shutter speed. Your shutter speed kind of works a little different from video versus photo. In the film world, your shutter speed is a control that you have the least amount of control over. Why? Because your shutter speed should be set to double your frame rate to get a natural motion blur. I want you to stop for a second and hold your hand in front of your face like this. Then take your hand and move it left to right really quickly while looking at it. That blur motion is what us as humans see. So when you double your shutter speed to your frame rate, the footage captures the same type of motion blur. In general, the higher your shutter speed is, the better it is to stop motion. Thinking back to my photography days when I would shoot sports, I would really crank that shutter speed so that the athletes stop still in time with no blur in my image. The thing to remember with shutter speed is, the higher the number is, the darker the image will be. So you would have to compensate the other settings to get the right exposure. Okay, so now that we know what each option controls, let's see how we make them work together the proper exposure and maintain the correct settings to get a clean, professional image. Real quick guys, like the video, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe too. I'm trying to get to 10K subs, so I mean, help a brother out and share with at least 2 of your friends. You ever have your camera out and someone comes up to you and it says something like, "Oh, if I had a camera like that, I'd be able to make a living doing this too." You kind of look at them like, I know for sure you've never shot a camera on manual. Well, knowing how to make these 3 settings work together is what's going to separate you from an amateur and a professional. Our first task is to get an exposure in the studio where our motion blur is correct, we have our subject in focus and the background is blurred, and reduce as much noise in the shadows as possible. Here's how we would approach that. So the first thing I know is I'm going to be shooting at 24 frames per second. So automatically I know my shutter speed will need to be double my frame rate to get the proper motion blur. So boom. My shutter speed is going to be set at 50. Now, I want to get a blurry background. In order to get that, I need to set my aperture nice and low to get that shallow depth of field. The last thing I want to do is set my ISO. After I had a chance to see what my shot looks like with the shutter speed and aperture set, I'm going to go ahead and set my ISO to 800 and see what my exposure looks like. In an environment like this, we can see that our shot is definitely underexposed. But a lot of you are probably like, "Jamal, we just learned about this, and the only thing we can do is increase the ISO. But then the image is going to start getting noisy." And my response to that is, you're absolutely right. The footage is probably going to start looking like trash once I raise the ISO. So what do we do now? Can't change the shutter speed, and our aperture is set as low as it can get. Well, this is where we want to start introducing controlled light into the mix. There will be a full breakdown of controlled light in the Filmmaker Pro course. Sign up today in the description below. For the sake of this video, we're just going to turn on our Amaran 100D with our softbox until we get an exposure on the face that we like. And if we can, we'll start dropping down the ISO to get an even cleaner image. When we're all set, we should have something that looks like this. Nice shallow depth of field, clean noiseless image, and the right motion blur. Let's try and get something where the background and the subject is more in focus, and still maintain the proper exposure. This is going to be a little bit more difficult because once we start raising that aperture, things get dark quick. We're going to go ahead with 800 ISO, set our shutter to 50, and the aperture let's say to 7.1. And yeah, you can't see anything. Let's turn on our key light and try and get the exposure on the subject. Okay, yeah, that looks pretty good now. But the background, jeez, still way too dark. Let's turn on another light and try bouncing it off the ceiling. So now, let's see. Would you look at that? Much better. Of course, you could tweak the light a little more or less to get an exposure that you want in the room. But that's pretty much how it works. As you start becoming more familiar with your camera settings and how they work, you'll be able to walk into a room and have a general idea of how you have to set your camera. Let's do a quick little recap. The first thing you want to do is set your shutter speed. As in most cases, this is always going to be double your frame rate. Next, you're going to want to set your aperture based on the depth of field that you want, or overall exposure of the scene. Lastly, you're going to set your ISO to the recommended range of the camera. Then you're going to analyze your frame. If you still don't have an exposure, introduce controlled light and shape it the way you need to. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. And if you have any other questions, make sure you leave them in the comments below. And if you still haven't done it, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe as well, and share this with a friend or two so more people can benefit from this information. And also, if you want more information on Filmmaker Pro, I'm going to be leaving a link in the description where you can see our website. And if you're ready to get started now, go ahead and fill out the contact form to join our mailing list. Thanks for watching, guys. And remember to look, learn, and share. Take it easy, guys. Peace.